everybody, it's Peggy Hasenauer coming to you from the University of Chicago Kobler Diabetes Center and the Celiac Center via my front porch. I have a fantastic guest with me today, Brianna Wolin. Hi, Brianna.
Hi, how are you?
We're great. We are so grateful to have you here today with us to talk not only about diabetes, but celiac. And I think that there's a lot of crossover and a lot of opportunity for us to educate folks. May is National Celiac Awareness Month, which is fantastic. And it gives us such a unique opportunity to connect with you, not only because of your journey, but because of your interest in biomedical engineering and your entrepreneurial background. I just think it's fantastic. So Brianna, if you could just share with our audience a little bit about you and perhaps your personal journey with diabetes and celiac.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 4 years old. And shortly thereafter, when I was 5, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, though there was some suspect when I was originally diagnosed with type 1 that I may be celiac as well, but the symptoms did not present for about a year later. So now I've been living with both for what I would say is effectively my whole life. And to be honest, I tell people that I'm grateful that I was diagnosed with both as a young child because that's my norm. I don't miss anything. I don't think of a life otherwise. This is like what I've always known. I also come from a sort of impressive genetic lineage of type 1 diabetes. So my mom and my grandma and my great-great-grandfather had type 1.
Wow.
So we're sort of unique in that way, yes. But I am the only celiac in the bunch thus far that we know of. Other than living with the conditions for pretty much my whole life, I pursued biomedical engineering for my undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan. And right before I graduated there, I founded a startup in healthcare technology and chronic disease, which I carried on for about 5 years before I closed it just about a year or so ago now. And since then have pursued degrees in prosthetics and orthotics and in biomedical engineering as a master's program as well, and have pursued research work in bionic prostheses. So I've been really involved in medicine meets technology for pretty much my whole life.
I think that's amazing. And I think as we are thinking about ways to connect individuals who have both celiac and diabetes in a way that's unique, one of the things we did about, was that 2 years ago? It might have been 2 years ago. We brought together young adults who were facing the challenges of type 1, and we've considered thinking about that in the context of celiac. What has been your experience meeting other young adults with both celiac and type 1?
So, it's interesting because I don't know that I necessarily know people living with both in terms of in-person connections, maybe one or two. Most of the connections that I have made have been predominantly one or the other. In addition, I've sort of made connections with people living with food allergies as well, because I have several food allergies on top of celiac disease, and there's a common language between the two. I know it's a misnomer to say that if you have celiac that you have a gluten allergy, because that's not true. But the requirements of how you prepare food or how someone prepares food for you are pretty much one and the same. I have met a lot of people online. I'm very active on Twitter, on Instagram, a little bit of Facebook. I ran a blog for a really long time that's still active that I update with a celiac safe Chicago restaurant list. So that's been really fun and popular, and right now, of course, on hold, but hopefully someday we'll be able to return to going to those great places that serve the community. But it is a very complicated thing to meet people who live with both, particularly. And the startup that I founded and worked on for several years was based on that concept that people want to meet other people in person living with the same conditions that they are. And the unique perspective, particularly that comes from living with both type 1 and celiac, that a lot of people don't understand, including the physicians who treat us, to be honest, because we're living in a sort of this duality where on the one side, you're looking for something that's low glycemic index to have for breakfast as a type 1, but your gluten-free options are all rice flour. And that doesn't exactly work out so well. So it's been hard to meet other people living with both.
I think your perspective is so unique. And I think one of the things that we're working on with our celiac team. So you, I'm sure, have known Dr. Guandolini for some time, who has been our amazing founder of the Celiac Center and leader. What we're excited about is to consider ways that we can create, at least virtually, a
Mhm.
dual clinic for individuals like you, children and adults who are facing both type 1 and celiac. And I
Yeah.
think your perspective about Find My Ditto was just that, that people really wanted to connect in terms of not only dual diagnosis, but connect with other people that had the same diagnosis they did. And
Right.
so that's what we're trying to serve and trying to do. So you've seen Dr. Guandolini, is that correct, over the
So
years?
I was one of his very first patients in the US.
Amazing.
So he saw me, and he was the one, his team actually got my slides from the endoscopy that I had when they were trying to figure out what was going on. And the first hospital completely missed it. They just didn't see anything wrong. And my parents pursued having it read by a celiac specialist. And he was kind of like, what do you mean? This is so clear. It's so obvious. And so I saw him starting when I was 5 years old up until I outgrew his clinic, and he's been around for a long time in my life.
That's fantastic. And on the Kovler side of things,
Mhm.
you still connect with us and follow us. And tell me what that interaction is like with your physician and with our Kovler team.
Yes, so I've seen Dr. Phillipson for ages and ages. So I know that I see the best of the best from diabetes and celiac perspective going through both centers. And in the era of the coronavirus, I had my telemedicine appointment with Dr. Phillipson, and prior to that, I was going into the clinic, several times a year, and we actually got to talking about what percentage of the population actually does have both type 1 and celiac, because we know that there's a gross underdiagnosis rate,
Sure.
particularly with celiac disease.
Hmm.
And additionally, was speaking with Dr. Phillipson because he was saying that he thinks that that should be something that's more easily tracked in the EMR system, that you can pull a list of all the patients that are coming in for their celiac care and their diabetes care, trying to see if the number of patients in the University of Chicago health system that have both matched up with the sort of suspected percentage rates that have been published epidemiologically. And what they were able to see thus far, I know, is that the numbers were coming in lower than expected at the University of Chicago. So he wasn't seeing as many. Every time I go see him, I was asking, oh, how many other type 1 celiacs do you know? And he's like, really not that many who come to see me, but we know that there are a lot of us out there. It's just hard to make that connection.
Correct. And then often, as you point out, oftentimes they start out with a pediatric endocrinologist and or a pediatric GI specialist. Perhaps they're at different institutions. Perhaps we're not capturing data. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. We have a new joint effort that we've created, not only with Dr. Phillipson, but Dr. Siri Greeley, who's one of our pediatric endocrinologists, to partner with Dr. Ritu Verma, who is
Mm-hmm.
our new medical director of the Celiac Center, and really to figure out how we can see these patients clinically, but also then focus on some overlap. What have you found to be helpful to you, Brianna? You're not newly diagnosed, but you've also been dealing with this for a long time. So, how does the psychosocial perspective play into this, and how do you frame it for yourself and for other people so that it doesn't feel so burdensome?
Yeah, I was speaking with some people about this on both from the celiac and the diabetes community on Twitter yesterday, actually. And on the diabetes perspective, there are people, we were all talking about how everyone likes to say that their pancreas is dead. And really, the fact of the matter is that your pancreas is still really busy. It's just your islet cells are not there. And we got to
Correct.
laughing about it because we're saying, you know, there's still a lot going on inside. And on the celiac perspective, there was a recently published chart of like all the psychosocial doom and gloom of living with celiac disease. Like, oh, you live a gluten-free diet, but there are all these million things that you have to think of and that are so hard. And a lot of us were saying, the ones that have been diagnosed, you know, living with it for 10, 20, 30 years, that the benefit of a full life on a gluten-free diet far outweighs all the concerns. That being said, it's not easy. I'm not someone who tells people, oh, you know, life is so simple, because it's not. I think we're waiting on technology and sort of the pace of technology to catch up with medicine, which is my particular interest. But I think that a lot of what I tell people is, of course, you have to find people that you can talk to. Like I said, I come from a household that has type 1 diabetes, so that is built in for me, and it's not for a lot of people. But also the importance of not dwelling on it in general. I
I think
think
that's
that,
fair. You bring such a positive energy and approach to wellness, and I think that's what we often miss in this process. That although there are challenges to many disease states, um, it is still a blessing, right? That many people who have both celiac and type 1 have lives that are full and healthy and free of some of the burdens that often people talk more about maybe than they should. But I also think that there's a lot of value in your utilization of technology over the years. And perhaps
absolutely.
we should talk a little bit about how that's helped you,
Sure,
and how that's framed your diabetes management. So can you tell us a little bit
sure.
about technology you're currently using?
Right, absolutely. And I want to start by saying that my perspective of technology, my perspective of dealing with everything that I'm dealing with comes from a very significant place of privilege. And I recognize my privilege. There are a lot of people who cannot afford a single vial of insulin right now, which is a
Hmm.
really, really significant issue. And they're more concerned about a unit of insulin than they are about getting the latest technology or being able to be
Fair
positive
point.
about everything. So I want to be sure I take the time to check my privilege on that. But right now, in terms of technology that I use, medical technology that I use for diabetes, I use a Dexcom G6, which is the latest edition of Dexcom as of now, but they are expected to release an update, I think this year or early next year, depending on now with everything going on. And I do not use a pump. I did for a period of time. It did not work for me. It was not a good solution for me. It made me angry and burnt out. And I tried it, and I tried it once as a child and once as an adult, and neither time worked. And so I actually don't even use insulin pens because I find them clunky. I use good old syringes and vials, which, you know, for a lot of people, you know, it's almost a laughing moment because they're like, what do you mean? You're so technologically involved and engaged and you're an engineer and you use syringes and vials. And it speaks directly to the idea that no one technology works for everyone, even for those
Agreed.
of us who are super technologically inclined. You know, I could learn how to set up any one of the things and how to use it in 5 minutes, but it doesn't work for my management, which is a different thing. So I love my combination of a Dexcom and vials and syringes for what it is. You know, there are still issues with accuracy. You know, it's not a system. They say no finger sticks ever. I firmly disagree with that. There are accuracy issues. Um, Insulin hasn't changed in decades. It still does the same thing. It's not always predictable. There are a lot of other factors in play. So I like it for what it is. Of course, it's, you know, it's an evolving sort of landscape. But I like the security of wearing a Dexcom. I like knowing that it'll wake me up during the night, that I can go out on a long walk and it'll keep track of everything for me. So it's one less thing to stop for. Not that I'm less worried about it, but I don't have to stop for it, which I think is the
I
difference.
think there's a lot of value in what you're saying, that not the one size fits all, or the utilization of technology for every single person is unique and
Mhm.
individual. And while the technology may be fantastic, there are some there's certain comfort level not only with the technology, and you're very comfortable with technology. It's the day-to-day management, and combined with psychosocial, combined with your lifestyle, that it sounds like this is a good fit for you. How do you match your carbs, and do you have an insulin to carb ratio? So for those of you who maybe are just learning about diabetes, we often try to figure out how many carbohydrates someone is eating during a meal, and then you match it to how much insulin you're taking. So how does that work for you without a pump?
Right. So I have ratios that are general, that what I use different morning, noon, and night. Um, those ratios are not hard and fast in the way that, I might take more insulin for something that has more protein and more fat, not just based on carbs. This is, like you said, for people who are just learning, it's
Sure.
not just a strict whatever the carb count is on the box. That's exactly how much insulin you're going to need. There are about 40 million factors that may
Right.
become involved.
Fiber, fat,
Um,
absolutely.
and to be honest, with my, living as a type 1 and a celiac with additional food allergies, my sort of over the years, I have food that I know how much insulin I need for based on trial and error over the years. So I spend less time with a calculator in my brain saying, okay, it's 9 a.m., it's 1 to 6, there's 32 in here, how much do I need? Do I take it now or later? It's There becomes sort of like a repository in your brain of, okay, this is the breakfast I had 3 days ago. This is what I'll probably need. And then every day, because hormonal shifts or whatever, every day is different. I have a very rapidly changing system that a lot of endocrinologists are sort of intrigued by, because my needs change really drastically, really quickly. So one day is one thing, and 3 days later it could be completely different.
So
And
you've really developed in many ways your own algorithm. I mean, you really have,
absolutely, absolutely.
basically, and but it's unique to you. So how do you share? So I think what's valuable about this is, while you're using syringes and vials of insulin to drop your insulin and give it to yourself, you are still actively, and in fact in a very sort of brain gamey way, really keeping your brain sharp by figuring a lot of this out on your own, as opposed to relying on the product to figure it out for you, or the pump.
Right. Well, it's
Um,
definitely something that I think contributed to my love of math and my pursuit of engineering.
oh,
Done
without question, if you were
ratios
managing
since
all
I
this
was
in
about
your head,
6.
yes, yes. I also was interested in, when you have these virtual visits with Dr. Phillipson, then the beauty, though, of utilization of some technology is that you're able to share the information from the Dexcom with him. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yes. So I do use the Dexcom share system to share my graphs and data with Dr. Phillipson. I do not keep track of my carbs and insulin every time I take them. I've been a type 1 for, like I said, it's been over 20 years. I don't keep a logbook. I know a lot of people who do, and there's no right or wrong. And there's also a consult your physician. Don't take my advice without consulting your physician. So I don't keep a logbook, but I share. So my Dexcom is linked to the Kovler Center share system. So whenever he wants or I want, I can say, can you look at this? Which is really beneficial, and can identify trends and things like that. And then you take everything sort of into account. The idea is that you only see your provider for less than 30 minutes each appointment, maybe, like for me, it's usually twice a year compared to all the hours that I'm taking care of myself. So you have to sort of contextualize everything. What's the right thing for you? What do you know based on what you've done over the years? And then compare it to what the suggestion is. Or, even better is to bring up what you think is happening. Because I think that a lot of patients often feel like they should just be sponges and listen to everything, but they need to contribute to the conversation also. And share what you've noticed. And especially in this time, a lot of people are dealing with a lot of changes in their routines and their activity and their access to supplies, whatever it is. Bring up those concerns, have those conversations, because unfortunately, due to HIPAA, you can't have a conversation that says, oh, I have this other patient who does this.
Right.
The benefit on the flip being both that your physician has heard stories from everyone, so they can de-identify,
Right.
tell you suggestions from everyone. And secondarily, returning back to social media and technology, you can crowdsource a heck of a lot of opinions, and not all of
Good
them
or
are
bad. Good or bad, as you know.
exactly, not all of them are good. And not all of them are bad.
Right.
I think that it's really interesting. There's, you get these case studies almost out of social media that,
Right.
people who think that no one else has ever experienced something. And it happened to me a couple weeks ago that there was an article published through the organization Beyond Type 1. They published an article because they picked up a story of someone who was having an unusual type 1 experience. And it was the first time that I had seen in writing an experience that I have dealt with for about 5 years that no physician has figured out. So I commented back to them. I said, whoever this is, because it was written anonymously, I said, whoever this is, I know what this is. We figured out how to deal with it. Like, put the person in contact with me.
Really cool.
Yeah. So understanding that there are pros, cons, of course, to social media, and don't listen to everything you hear there. And there's a lot of misinformation, of course. But there are good people. There are a lot of good people in different medical communities online who want to share good, solid, research-driven information, whether it's the physicians themselves or patients.
I agree. And I think you bring up such a valid point too about being in conversation with your physician. So being in conversation with uh, what your needs are, what you can glean from their experience with patients, but then really continuing to have an ongoing conversation. So what's been interesting, and I hope that you'll experience this as well, is that Dr. Phillipson has said that the beauty of the virtual visit is that the visits are structured and more concentrated in their view of data, their discussion of problem issues, and setting goals, but that patients then can be seen more frequently. And so you can continue to be in conversation with your physician, which maybe some patients weren't comfortable doing, or maybe they felt like, I don't want to bother him.
Right.
But in the last few months, Dr. Phillipson says there are many patients that he is seeing every 2 to 3 weeks, and they're checking in, they're talking about different aspects of their care and
Right.
how their changes are working.
Right. And I think that that really depends on, though, an engaged patient, because it's going to be mainly patient driven. And additionally, when you aren't in person with your physician, they can't notice some nuance to
Fair
the
point.
So if you're noticing things like weight loss or weight gain, or, your foot looks different, or
Mm-hmm.
you're noticing, maybe hair loss, whatever it is, a lot of these endocrine related things, or on the GI side, a lot of people get uncomfortable talking about GI function. And it's often easier to do it when you're sitting in, a small appointment room and it's you and the doctor, and there's maybe a chart on the wall you can point to. But it's important that you as a patient actually go into these telemedicine appointments with your own agenda too, and being able to reflect on physical things that may not be seen through the camera screen, and to bring those up, because the physician on the other end can't tell. You're not in person. You're still not in person. So you have to
Absolutely.
optimize that appointment.
Absolutely. I cannot thank you enough for your time today. You have brought such spirit and uh, positivity to folks who are trying to figure this out. I think that what I love about you, Brianna, is that you fully acknowledge that you've had some fantastic care and a lot of great support around you, but you are always willing to give back, whether it's giving information to folks that you don't even know online, connecting people to the right resources, focusing on your passion in terms of your professional career and how you can make it better for individuals. So I just want to thank you for that. Brianna, you've always been such a light for us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's really kind.
Of course. And we plan on having a part two with you because I'd love to talk to you more.
That sounds great. I'll be here.
Okay, so for anybody who's interested in more information about the Kobler Diabetes Center, go to Kovler, K-O-V as in Victor, L-E-R, diabetescenter.org. And you can also visit our Celiac Center as well. And we'll share information when we put this on Facebook and also when we send it out through Constant Contact. Thank you again, Brianna. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.